Steve Davis is the President and Chief Executive Officer at PATH. Prior to joining PATH in 2012, Steve served as a business leader and strategist for a range of private and nonprofit organizations, as well as international organizations. His experience include CEO of Corbus, a global digital media firm, directing the Infectious Disease Research Institute as CEO, and advising top international organizations in social innovation for McKinstry & Company. Earlier in his career, he practiced law at the international law firm of K&L Gates with a focus on intellectual property. Steve's long-standing commitment to human rights and global health and development is reflected in his earlier work with international refugee and human rights organizations. Steve earned a BA from Princeton, an MA in Chinese Studies from the University of Washington, and a law degree from Columbia. He and his partner, Bob Evans, are parents to a 17-year-old, Ben. So how does this guy who grew up in rural Montana become such a force in global health? His career direction demonstrates that he is not having a midlife nonprofit interlude, but in fact that he has focused his entire career on blending his legal training toward human rights, resulting in positive social change. Steve believes that all of us should become triathletes, activists who are not only open to collaboration, but who go further to focus on the power of nonprofit, public, and private sectors to work together in innovation, and to use those disciplines to make the world a better place. So put on your running shoes, and please welcome to the podium the newest Seattle Rotarian, Steve Davis.
Well, thank you. It's really a great honor and pleasure to be here with you all today. And I'm very grateful to be associated with this chapter of Rotary. And I'm especially grateful for the amazing work that Rotary continues to do on so many important projects around the world, including the malaria project. And I've been quite engaged in the conversations as well about eradicating polio in the world and malaria's extraordinary role there. I'm also actually, interestingly, have another connection with Rotary in that I serve as the vice chair of the World Economic Forum and Davos's work on civil society. And your international chairman and I spend a lot of time together thinking about where civil society goes and how do we collaborate more fully. And I appreciate that work as well. Now, what I'm not grateful for is having to follow Sherman Alexie to this podium. You know, I think he's like one of my rock star heroes, and I love his work, and you know, and his work as both an artist and an activist is so inspiring. And I could share with you some Montana farm boy stories, but I don't think they'd come close. So what I thought about is changing, while he was talking and sharing the power of creativity, I thought today I should spend a little bit of time sharing about the power of innovation. It's a word we talk about all the time, we use, we read, everybody claims they're at the center of it, but it's something that I think merits a little bit of unraveling or dissecting. And today I'd love to talk about that. I'd like to talk a little bit why I care, a little bit about what PATH is doing as an innovator, a few comments on some trends that we see in the innovation landscape in the world, and then what you and what folks here in Seattle can be thinking about and doing about it. And I'm going to try to make sure we have time for Q&A. So, you know, innovation really is an overused cliche. I mean, it's, you know, among brand managers and branding specialists in the globe, it's like one of the top words now. You know, everybody's innovation this and innovation that. And the fact is, of course, man has been innovating, and men and women have been innovating since the beginning of time. But we are sort of in a place where there's a lot of escalation and acceleration of an innovation, particularly driven by technologies. So we've actually done quite a bit of work to understand it, both as an art, and there is certainly an art to innovation, and a science. And there is a real rigorous discipline to innovation that I think people sometimes do not understand or take for granted. That we think it's about some cool idea in a garage somewhere as opposed to a very laborious, intentional, and quite nonlinear process that we go through. There's all sorts of other issues related to innovation, just how to make sure it's disruptive but not so disruptive that it's not useful. How do we make sure it's sustainable? And that's a conversation that we talk about all the time. How do we scale innovation, and even to the level of which is innovation that doesn't scale even innovation? There are also types of innovation, product and service innovation, and operational innovation, and financing innovation, and actually organizational innovation, and we've got to think about across all four of those things. So I get very excited about this topic, as you can see, but as you can also see that a lot of people at those three big path tables go, oh my God, here we go again. You know, he's going to give us one of those lectures he gives on the university circuits about this, and I won't do that. But I would like to talk about some very practical issues around innovation, and within the context of this larger conversation. I was in New York last week attending the Clinton Global Initiative and being an active participant in a number of activities around the UN General Assembly. It was quite fun because what we were doing is toggling between those places, speaking, events, and other activities, where they're talking about policy and the Millennium Development Goals and all sorts of things. That's how we're going to change the world. We actually set up as PATH, who is recognized, at least in those quarters, as one of the drivers of innovation in the global health and development agenda. We set up a set of 10 very cool innovations outside in the lobby. You walked out of the General Assembly room, and here they were. And we have those on your table, so you can look at them at some point. And we actually, and it was such a great moment to watch these sort of high-level policymakers. The Prime Minister of Norway walks out, and I'm with him, and he's sort of like, wow, this is what we're talking about. How do we disrupt the way we address malaria or diarrhea or these diseases that are killing many, many, many children needlessly? And what is it really going to take away from the policy down to the stuff that matters? So today I want to talk a little bit about innovation that really matters. Kind of reminds me of the story of, when the taxi driver and the priest ended up dying on the same day, and they're both lined up to talk to St. Peter, and the priest goes in first, and he was a parish priest, and he gives his whole rap about how good he was and how obedient and how many sermons he gave, and then the St. Peter nods, and then he gives him this sort of old cloak, and he kind of gives him the sort of a very cheap room to go to, and he's going, wow, that's kind of weird. This is pretty harsh. And so next thing you know, the taxi driver gets up and talks to St. Peter, and then all at once he's given his cloak of gold, and the presidential suite, and the room keys to the minibar. I mean, it was a pretty impressive thing. And so the priest goes, whoa, that I don't get that. And so what's the deal here? And I've been given sermons, and he goes, no, you don't get it, St. Peter said, while you've been preaching, people have been sleeping. While he's been driving, people have been praying. So it kind of depends on what matters. So I think about innovation that matters, and I've had the privilege in my sort of career, from a civil rights activist to an IP lawyer to an internet pioneer to heading McKinsey's Global Social Innovation Program around the world, to think about and see a lot of cool innovation. Ways that we've not only invented new ideas, but we've adapted them, we've got them in the hands of the people that need them most, and we've scaled them up. So hundreds of millions of people are affected by this work. And PATH, right here in our community, one of the best kept secrets, unfortunately, in Seattle sometimes, and now an institutional member of your Rotary Club, is really at the heart of this idea of taking and transforming innovation to scale. I feel very lucky at this point in my career to be able to engage in this work with PATH. So let me tell you a little bit about PATH for those that don't know us or maybe not know us well. So we're committed to figuring out how to reduce inequity in the world. That's our mission. We're a nonprofit that says, you know, we believe that it's unfair, it's not economically smart, and it's politically dangerous for there to be so much inequity in the world. And therefore, we need to do something about it. And Gordon and others started this journey almost 40 years ago. But we're doing it with a very sophisticated set of tools, business and product tools. We are using transformative innovation across a number of platforms to address that inequity. We share a common mission with Rotary in our intention and goal of transforming and having an impact on a world-changing and worldwide scale. And hundreds of millions of people are affected by this. Now at PATH, if you could, next slide, at PATH, we do this across 5 platforms of innovation. We work a lot on the first is social and system innovation. So what's social science? A whole range of social science, behavioral change, and other kinds of evidence that we can learn and build from to see how do we change systems and behaviors so that people in different parts of the world can actually get access to medical facilities, create demand for new products, reach the last mile, and so there's a lot of innovation in this area. The second platform is our vaccines. I'm not sure which ones are showing up actually, but our vaccines, and this is an area, maybe just all 5 could show up, is vaccines is an area where we have a lot of work. It's one of the most cost-effective and most important interventions in terms of saving lives. There are way too many vaccine-preventable deaths going on in the world today, and that has a huge compounding effect on families, villages, health systems, and communities and nations. And so we're quite committed to work on developing new vaccines, developing tools to support the easier introduction of vaccines, and to help design, with global health leaders, the best way to introduce vaccines to communities. So we do a lot on vaccines. We also work in drugs. So we have a drug development group that's identified ways to advance drugs to look at new and cheaper ways to treat diseases, particularly in the area of diarrhea, which is the #2 killer of kids in the world, and we believe that we're on the verge of having some real breakthrough there. We also work a lot on diagnostics. And diagnostics is, you all here just talked about what Rotarians do, is the critical game changer in a lot of the work around the world in improving health, because we end up not treating people for what they're sick with because we haven't figured it out, and we need to spend more time getting lower cost, high quality diagnostics into the places that people need them the most. So we have quite a platform there. And finally, we also do a lot of work on tools and devices, which is where Gordon started his career. We work on a lot of innovative, low-cost, but very effective tools, ranging from new ways to inject vaccines, to reproductive health tools, to a variety of new things we're working on around cold chain and cold chain management and better refrigerators and things like that. So it's across quite a broad portfolio. Now, you'd say, wow, that's a lot of stuff. And I can tell you it is a lot of stuff. It's a very broad platform, but we're increasingly thinking about how do we bring that together into a stronger institutional focus. So some sort of factoids that might help land where we are in all of this. PATH is now one of the largest NGOs in the world. We are in the top 50 in the United States, and we're one of the largest global health. In fact, completely committed to global health. We're the largest in both Washington and one of the larger in the country, and we continue to grow. We have 1,300 people approximately around the world, about half of those in the U.S. and Europe, and about half are in countries elsewhere. We have about 200 and some technologies now in our pipeline, so we're in one stage of development or other and advancing those that merit advancement to get more people to use them. We have won a number of significant awards, all under someone else's watch, so I'm not bragging here. I'm actually simply reflecting the successes of the past, including one of the most effective NGOs. A lot of awards is from the Tech Award as one of the most innovative NGOs, a leading award for humanitarian work around the world. And we're expanding and advancing our footprint around the world. We've also had a great year of lots of successes and some failures, because as an innovator, you can't have one without the other. But let me share a few of the things across those platforms that we've done that might be useful to give you a better illustration of what innovation that matters looks like. One of the things we've done is in the world of vaccines, worked on both product and financial innovation in order to address meningitis in Africa, a very deadly disease in the meningitis belt of Africa. Many people die. If they don't, a lot of people who don't die end up being very debilitated, and therefore it has an enormous burden on those systems and families and communities. And so the thing is people in rich countries or developed countries don't die of this. This is a disease that really is not being addressed. There are vaccines. We know how to manage it in other countries, but because of the market failure, there's no incentive for a company to invest on this particular group of countries in Africa. We haven't seen a vaccine developed for that particular strain. So we got together about 15 years ago. I sat down, WHO, PATH, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and UNICEF, and said we have to do something about this. It's harmful on every level. And so the long story is of working with a pharmaceutical company, an Indian manufacturer, a Dutch-based biotech, working with the FDA, PATH was sort of like the general contractor on this thing. Brought it all together, drove it forward, and the quick bottom line here is that we have registered and introduced a meningitis A vaccine for Africa. It has now over 100 million kids, or young people, have been immunized, and nobody who has been immunized has had the disease. So, it's a very amazing story. Thanks. It's a great story of how do you take real innovation, not necessarily breakthrough science in the sense that there is but how do you adapt it for new markets and get it into the hands of people that need it. What's an interesting, for a group of folks that are associated with businesses, what's an interesting piece of that story is that one of the issues that we addressed was how to get it at the right price. Because if you don't, everything we do, if you're trying to deal with equity and inequality, is you need to understand the price that it's going to take to get it where we can use it. And so we actually had a lot of options under that project to do it at about $2 and $2.50, where if we had asked a pharmaceutical company to come in and sort of do this for us, a dose. But our comrades, our counterparts at the table, who were ministers of health from Africa, said you have to do this at 50 cents a dose, or we can't use it. And so that pushed us to do it differently. And I think that's the kind of price in financial innovation. A couple other very quick ones. Next is in the drug area. We were a part of developing what is called the semi-synthetic artemisinin. Artemisinin, the drug that many of you are aware of because it's one of the major treatments for therapeutics for malaria. Problem is it's made out of wormwood, a natural product that actually, because of its coming from trees, it actually has a variable marketplace. So we often see a supply-demand problem, and also that means a pricing problem. So how do we address that? Well, we worked with Berkeley and a couple other organizations to come up with a semi-synthetic model to create a reservoir of a semi-synthetic artemisinin in order to make sure that there's a stable reserve of artemisinin for the global markets. And we've now collaborating with Sanofi, and we launched that this year with at industrial production with Sanofi. And finally, the last one I mentioned is in maternal and child health, where we talk about system and services innovation. This is interesting because BHP Billiton, one of the largest companies in Australia, large commodities and extraction industry player, approached us and said, we would like you to work together on rethinking the design of community health systems in Southern Africa, in Mozambique and South Africa. So now we have a very interesting project bringing the best of both organizations together and looking at the first 1,000 days of a child's life in the very impoverished areas of Southern Africa to say, can we design the health clinic model differently, with better data, better tools, and better processes. So that's actually more about a design innovation. There's a lot of other cool things. We've had some breakthroughs on diagnostics. We've worked very interestingly on how to reach uniformed service members in some places in Africa who have not had the right kind of understanding of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And we also have about to announce, I think, what will be a really big breakthrough as a project PATH has been doing in China, working with a Chinese manufacturer to get a vaccine for another very, very bad disease called Japanese encephalitis approved for use around the world. That's the Chinese version that's very high quality and very low cost. And that will be an interesting breakthrough, not only to have a better product on the market at a much lower cost for the global market, but it's really a diplomatic and economic breakthrough too. So we'll see more economic price pressure with the Indian manufacturers to lower the prices of vaccines, and we'll also see China actually stepping up to the global agenda finally, which was it's a great thing. So what's in common about that? So there's some things across all these projects that you might note. One is they're almost in every instance multi-sectoral. We work with government, we work with private sector, and we work with nonprofits or community-based organizations. And in my strong belief, it's only through that kind of model that we're going to solve many of our 21st century problems. They're audacious. We're not shy. And we believe that you got to tackle the big problems. And so we're committed to continuing to do that, including the elimination of malaria, the elimination and eradication of polio, and meeting the maternal death goals of the Millennium Development Goals. So we've got some big ambitions, and we have plans to get there. We also know that it's risky. So we have to manage our risk, and we have to think about, we run clinical trials around the world at any given time. We're working on a lot of places that most people don't want to go, and we have to deal with that. And so we've got to think through that. Talent is central. I know every business person in this audience knows that, we can have good plans, we can have even financing, but if you don't have the right people on the right seats and that right bus, you're not going to get there. And so I'm pretty obsessive, and I think that my predecessors and team here are pretty obsessive about having great talent. And finally, price really matters. In our world, this isn't a let's develop a product, add profit, divide it by the units, and get our price per unit. Ours is the opposite. The price is driven from the very beginning of the concept, that we got to get it at a price that works for the lowest resource settings in the world. So what are some couple trends that I want to mention? So that's all great. It's incredible work, fun to be here. I'm glad to share other people's successes. What have I tried to do in the last year? Well, there are a few things. One is, obviously, we're trying to pull forward this kind of innovation, but take it to either higher levels of impact and scale. One of the things we've noticed in a lot of work we've done is we're not getting enough innovation to scale. We have too much that's too far up in the pipeline, and we're not advancing it because we don't have the right kind of regulatory capability, or there's not enough people commercializing for the private market use of it, or there's not enough clinical trial capacity around the world. So we're actually working with a number of partners on how to build out more capability to advance innovation to scale, and we've got some very ambitious and plans on how to do that. The second thing that we're really noticing in the global health development and innovation landscape is the shift that's happening geopolitically. That, frankly, the 20th century model of aid, was very much a supply-side export business that people in Geneva and Washington and London would sit around and, and I'm being cynical here, but would sort of decide what was needed, what services and tools and products were needed, and they would sort of throw them over the fence, and that was how then people would implement. What the 21st century is increasingly looking like is we've been successful. We have more capacity in countries. Countries are driving their own agenda. They want to create their own plans for their development and needs. So our role shifts much more to being responsive to demand, being a technical partner to country leaders, and actually shifting our weight toward being a much more import and supply demand side driven organization. So we're ambitiously restructuring a number of things to get there. And finally, we have seen really some real challenging problems about the lack of integration in these different projects. PATH is actually a perfect example. We have a malaria vaccine project. We have the largest malaria control project in the world. We have malaria diagnostics. We have malaria in pregnancy. We have a malaria advocacy program. And we have malaria drugs. All of those are in 6 different programs that basically need to talk to each other. So we're partly integrating our own approach, but more importantly, at the community and individual family level, saying we got to bring a basket, a toolkit of tools and supplies. We can't keep doing this one after another after another. The best, kind of illustrative story, and I pardon it for the lunchtime conversation, but in some places in the world, you actually find there's condoms being distributed for HIV control, and there are condoms being distributed for family planning purposes, but there are 2 different places you go for different condoms for the 2 purposes. And it's like, oh, really? We've got to figure out how to bring these things together and create a much more effective and efficient system. So all of those are cool things. We sit in the middle of it here in Seattle. You all are part of it. We are in an environment with amazing innovation taking all around us, both in global health and development, as well as in thinking about financial innovation and in service and product innovation. There are 33 organizations here in the Pacific Northwest committed solely to this work. As well, we work with a number of partners, Starbucks, Cascade Design, a variety of private sector partners in terms of advancing this work. And I think there's a lot more we can do here locally, including our, of course, affiliation with many of the other players like Seattle Biomed, the Fred Hutch, and the Gates Foundation. But we need your support, we need your encouragement, we need your ideas, and we need you to help influence policymakers to make sure that innovation stays on the top of our agenda here. And that's not an easy thing to do, but we really need all of you to help us support that. We also need you to help translate this innovation agenda and its importance, the kind of work that Rotary does and what PATH does and what many others do, into something that's simple and powerful and doable. Sometimes this gets to the point where I find myself talking to people and they think, wow, this is way beyond me. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's really not that hard. Let me just end with one short illustration. So a couple months ago, I was in South Africa, and I was in a very, very difficult township where the equities of post-apartheid South Africa have not reached. It's just a stunningly hard place to live, and way too many kids, and particularly mothers, die there. And we see a huge, rampant amount of maternal mortality that is unnecessary. And we are in this clinic, and this woman was showing me, where there's very few supplies, very few resources, and this really great nurse was showing me around, and she's like this perfect out of a TV movie, salt of the earth, kind of crusty, in your face, experienced, weathered. But she said, she was showing me this logbook that she is used, and was South Africa's book that nothing's on digital, so this is all written, and it's like every patient that comes in, and it's sort of a page, and all the patients, and if they lived or died, and blah, blah, blah. And I noticed that she had drawn a bunch of lines. And I said, what are those? And she said, well, I need more columns. And I said, well, why do you need more columns? Well, because I'm not getting the information I need to make smart decisions about what we need to do in this clinic. And so she, on her own, created a bunch of columns to say I need to get this data and that data and that data. So, first of all, it's like, wow, that is innovation at its best. It's simple, it's effective, and it's coming from the grassroots. But it was also then our problem to say, well, can we take that logbook and go compare it to 15 other logbooks in the community, and then go back to the South African government and issue a logbook that matters, and a logbook that you need to change and amend it, and we'll get it digital soon enough. But those are the kind of simple stories, but it's really the kind of powerful stories that we need to share. So thank you all for your engagement. Thank you for your support, and thank you for inviting me to join you all. And I encourage you to get out your logbook. Thanks.
For questions, we have Kari and John Steckler on mic, so please come forward. There are a couple here in the middle.
First one here. Steve, welcome to the Rotary Club of Seattle. We're so proud to have you and Path as members. You talked about cross-sector collaboration, and from my vantage point, watching Path for well over a decade, I think that is one of the biggest secrets of your sauce, if you will. One of the things that sets Path apart from so many other organizations in your business and other businesses of global development around the world. And when you went through it, you talked about international organizations, NGOs, governments, and you mentioned business often during your talk, but you didn't say business when you specifically getting business to the table with those other participants is a big challenge because there are so many emotional, intellectual, unnecessary hurdles there. New to the business yourself, what do you think has enabled Path to be so successful here where others haven't been able to accomplish it?
Well, it's a great question, and by no means was there intended to be an oversight, because I actually think industry and business is probably the most essential person and increasingly to get to the table on some of these issues. But so I think Path's had some good track record because of the approach, which is not, trying to bust the myths of, well, X is inefficient and Y is greedy and Z is, we bring a lot of bias to those tables. I've been involved in a lot of cross-sectoral collaborations and negotiations, and I think, partly you've got to start with the sort of good intentions, that people are at this table because they care and they're trying to get something done, and to the degree that you identify that that's not the case early, then bail or work at it, but you have to make some hard decisions. And I think Gordon and my predecessors have come into this with a very proactive and positive view. We do, though, I think, have a lot more work to do. So Path is pretty good engaging industry and business on a case-by-case transactional basis. What we're trying to now do is say, and I spent a lot of time in New York last week on this, is how do we engage businesses more long-term and more strategically and over the course of better capacity building beyond one or two deals, and what's the affiliation that we could create. And that's still a lot of work to do. But I've written about and talk a lot about this idea of this tri-sector athlete, and I think we need more people, frankly, and if I was talking to a room of university students, I'd really push this, is more people who are willing to work across sectorally, because it's not just good intentions, but really understanding how government works, or some component of government, and their incentives and their issues and their challenges. Really understanding what it takes to do, what it takes to work on a mission-based, and then really understanding what a P&L is and how to drive it. And I think more of that in our toolkit and in our youth would be a great way to advance this.
Thank you for all that you and Path are doing for world health. My question is, to what extent are you concerned about population growth if you're successful in extending the lives of so many millions of people?
Well, first, yeah, it's an important question to hit head on. So first of all, our commitment really is to save lives and morbidity and mortality, particularly among women and girls, where there's the high, and children, where there's the most vulnerable. There are two things. We are quite active. There are two parts of the answer. One is we are quite active, and in our very DNA and roots, and work on family planning and reproductive health and advancing tools, better quality devices. We have a lot of work we're doing with on contraceptive tools. There's a women's condom that we've recently worked with and distributed and now distributing. So we're quite active in that agenda. I was actually in New York last week with the head of the UNFPA and the Secretary General on the Family Planning 2020 commitments and how do we advance those. But actually a more important part as the answer is there is evidence, unbelievable amount of evidence, that the healthier a family is, the lower their family size. So actually helping save lives is actually the only way that we get to less population. Then this has been true and demonstrated in every cultural region of the world, that a more stable, more healthy, more settled family leads to lower sizes. So where do we have 7 children, 11 children per family? In Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in places that are highly vulnerable. Where do we have, down to 2 or 1, even less kids per family in the Western developed world? As you see the trend, that's the trend. And so there is a large dividend that gets paid back if we get the world healthier.
Got a question over here?
Steve, always grateful for your leadership. When you allow yourself, when you land at CTAC after being at one of these thought leader kind of innovation experiences, to kind of think about King County and the inequities we have here, what's missing in our framework and our scaffolding that doesn't give us that sense of urgency? We have our form of MDGs, but we dance around it. What do you sense when you allow yourself to go there?
Well, it's a pretty tough question, and my partner works in the sort of the toughest schools in the city, and hear about this every day, and the kind of disconnect sometimes between me worrying about kids in Niger and he's worried about kids in Rainier Valley, and we talk about that. I'd say there are two things. I do believe, and obviously probably today in this country more than any other day you can talk about there's just, political courage is missing, and there is a lack of political courage. And it's not just, political will, but it's courage. You got to do the right thing, and I don't see enough leaders doing that, and both at the national level or even at the local level. And I'm not a politician. I would fail miserably. I would last about 2 minutes in a town hall meeting before I told someone that they were an idiot. But that said, I do believe that we've got to get people more aligned around some significant leadership. And frankly, our state needs more next generation leadership to step up to the plate. I also think that there's some interesting structural and innovation issues that we should be talking about. So I have been engaging with Dave Fleming and others on this whole idea of bringing some of this insight that we have on what works in low resource settings, other parts of the world, into our own backyard. There's a global to local campaign, but beyond that, I'm quite excited. I actually spoke at a meeting in London about it. I'd love to see PATH being really the leader in this. I hate the name, but there's this thing called, the Harvard Business School and others have talked about reverse innovation, which is, first of all, it's a bad name, right? Innovation's always been global, but the idea is that we need to bring back home we've now demonstrated ways that you can do really high quality, cost effective, get to the hardest communities to reach in the world tools and devices. So why aren't we taking some of that learning and bringing it back to this country? And we need to do that.
Got another one over here?
Yeah, two quick things. How do you make the connection between wormwood and malaria treatment? And within PATH, how do you stimulate and manage the creative process?
Yeah, those are two very different. So the connection between wormwood and malaria treatment is that artemisinin is a therapeutic treatment for malaria that is derived from the extract of a wormwood tree. So well, I don't know. Gordon would probably have the answer to that. I don't know. Somebody figured that out, but some smart person. Yeah, I'm sure that was derived from China, and it was, partly, and that's actually an interesting piece of the story on innovation, is looking at historical, kind of traditional Chinese medicine has lots of insights onto things that actually work or don't work, and that came out of that. But the broader question is I've had this throughout my career in different settings. How do you get stuff done? I'm a Montana farm boy. We like to get stuff done. We don't always say stuff. And I'm also, but you also want to be engaged in how do you break through big ideas and how do you, so there are a few things that I think I'm trying to do, I think others have done before me at PATH. One is to create some space for that. So, whether you think about the Google 10% rule or whatever, to say, look, about X% of your job is to deliver on that vaccine, but there's some time we're going to create on your dance card that you are able to step back and spend some time. We actually fund with our own unrestricted money or philanthropic money. Times, it's really something we ask individual donors to help support, the time it takes to get people, to give them the time to get together in a room with other super smart people and collaboratively think about the next idea or the next model. So I think it's getting the time and money to give people, smart people, the way to do that. And then I think it's a lot of, innovation often comes out of just an identified need. So we do spend a lot of time looking at landscapes of where the gaps are. And here's a very interesting example on family planning tools. So there's implants in many places. Implant technology is very important for women because where they have very little power in the household, if they can find a family planning tool that they can control and that it might not, they don't have to go very often and it may not be so visible to their partner, is a very important thing because of the gender inequity around family planning. But the problem is they're very difficult to remove. And so you have this disincentive for implants because of the pain and difficulty removal. So we identified that in a conversation, in a broader conversation, given the commitments Melinda Gates and David Cameron made last year in London. And we had a bunch of our kind of guys that are kind of geeky guys that are popular, read Popular Mechanics when they're 15. We're now paying them to do that at 45. And we said, think about that. And literally a week later, they came in with some ideas about how you could develop a low-cost, higher quality, easier to remove, removable implant. And so, creating giving them the problem space so they can come up with a solution space in an organized way as part of the answer.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.